The Australian Financial Review.
I would say the ceasefire is on massive life support, where the doctor walks in and says, "Sir, your loved one has approximately a 1% chance of living."
The negotiations to end the war against Iran are not going well.
It's unbelievably weak, I would say. I would call it the weakest right now, after reading that piece of garbage they sent us. I didn't even finish reading it.
As Donald Trump meets with Xi Jinping in Beijing, there's still no peace deal. And the longer the war drags on, the more it's costing the US president, both in terms of his popularity and the billions of dollars being spent.
The Pentagon asked Congress for up to another $200 billion in extra funding to pay for this conflict. That's a lot of money, especially when you consider just over a week ago, US federal debt surpassed 100% of GDP for the first time since World War II.
Welcome to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray. This week, United States correspondent Jessica Gardner on why China is emerging as the quiet winner from the war, how much the conflict has cost Donald Trump, and what it means for the midterm elections and the rest of his presidency. It's Thursday, May 14. Hi, Jess. Thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Hi, Lisa. Good to be here again.
Excellent. When we last spoke at the start of this year, you'd been in Washington about 6 months and you described covering Trump's White House as the classic drinking from a fire hose scenario. How's the fire hose going?
It certainly hasn't slowed down, but I was thinking about this, and the fire hose has this image of a full frontal assault of news, and what it has felt like lately is much more of a whiplash, like a tennis match, like lurching from side to side as you switch between covering all of these different topics. And maybe I can give you an example of just a short week in my life. In Washington, we had the White House Correspondents' Dinner on a Saturday night. I was on my couch watching, ready to write a story about Trump and this extraordinary long roast that he was prepared to give all of the journalists in the room. And as we all know, that is not how the night turned out.
No.
And I ended up having to do this hard pivot onto the state of political violence in America. I did go out afterwards to one of the parties in Washington, one of the after parties, and the mood was very bizarre. People were a little bit shaken up, but then they were still out and dancing, and it was kind of like, oh, that was weird, and on we go to the next thing.
They'd moved on very quickly.
We did move on very quickly. Later that week, only a few days later, we had King Charles in town. Trump put on the full charm offensive for this state visit, had the King and Queen on the lawns of the White House with the full kind of military regalia, and then Charles did this quite consequential speech to Congress. It was pretty incredible how he was able to so subtly skewer the president and his policies.
America's words carry weight and meaning.
And his approach to the rest of the world.
The actions of this great nation matter even more.
He called on America to
ignore the clarion calls to become ever more inward-looking.
The King made all of these points. He had a number of standing ovations. And at the end, Donald Trump said,
I want to congratulate Charles on having made a fantastic speech today at Congress. He got the Democrats to stand. I've never been able to do that.
It didn't seem to rankle him too much. I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah.
The following day, we had Jerome Powell do his final press conference as the Federal Reserve chairman.
You know, my concern is really about the series of legal attacks on the Fed.
Again, made quite a forceful rebuke of Donald Trump and his use of the justice system to go after the Federal Reserve and its governors.
I worry that these attacks are battering the institution and putting at risk the thing that really matters to the public, which is the ability to conduct monetary policy without taking into consideration political factors.
And really warned about the battering of Fed independence. There was a bit of news for Australia in that week.
President Trump has named a new US ambassador to Australia.
After a 15-month wait since Trump's inauguration, we finally got an ambassador.
Yeah.
His name is David Bratt. He'll be starting once his appointment is confirmed by the Senate. He's a very interesting guy. a very loyal, conservative Christian economist. But I think he's been put in that position as someone who's very loyal and tapped into the White House. As I said at the beginning, the main whiplash of all is the Iran war. We seem to jerk from ceasefire to more attacks to more peace talks. The state of the Strait of Hormuz continues to be very uncertain. And despite all of that, the markets still seem to be climbing higher. Each little bit of positive news that they hear, they seem to respond to. They don't mind this uneasy truce that we seem to be in, so long as there's not too many bombs flying around.
So let's talk about the war. As you said, there's been a string of chaotic and often confusing messages coming out of the White House about the Trump administration's position. Operation Epic Fury morphed into Operation Freedom, and then that was on pause. What has been the cost of the war for Trump?
There certainly has been a cost for President Trump from this war. It is one of the most unpopular foreign conflicts that the United States has ever engaged in. The average of the published polls that you see is that 6 out of 10 people do not approve of this war. The thing that is hurting him the most is the economic consequence that is filtering back into the United States into household budgets. And primarily that's because of these extraordinarily striking gasoline prices that we're seeing. Before the US and Israel went to war with Iran at the end of February, gasoline, as they call it over here, was $3 a gallon. It's now up at about $4.50 a gallon.
Okay.
So that's a 50% rise. And it happened almost immediately and doesn't seem to be coming down anytime soon. Trump's approval ratings too are at record lows, but I would caution you from overreading that because there is a really interesting story going on if you go a little bit deeper. There is, on the headline, quite a serious opposition to the war, but if you dig down into party alliances, actually support for the war is quite strong among Republican voters, even though the MAGA supporters, the Make America Great Again voter base, are said to be anti-war and voted Trump in on his promise to be a peacemaker and keep America out of these forever wars. It turns out they're actually more supportive of this war than we thought they would be. So in March, CBS, a broadcaster over here, put out this poll that shows even though 6 out of 10 Americans oppose the war, 92% of MAGA Republicans expressed support for that military action in Iran, and about 70% of non-MAGA Republicans supported the war.
Yeah, so that voting base is just very loyal to Trump, no matter what he does.
That's right. And when you live in Washington, D.C., it's a very Democrat-coloured kind of city, very blue. You have to get out of the city to really hear and feel this support from Trump and get a sense of the MAGA Republicans. So a couple of weeks ago, I went down to Miami and Palm Beach in Florida. This is a state that swung really deeply red at the last election. Of course, the president has his Mar-a-Lago private resort in Palm Beach that he goes to most weekends. And what I found was really unswerving support from Trump loyalists.
I support President Trump.
Yep.
I am 100% have faith and trust in him.
Even though some of them were hurting from this war.
I don't like my gas prices being high. I don't like inflation going up. I know this war in Iran has a lot to do with the oil and messing with all those things, all those economic factors, but it is what it is.
The people I spoke to on the street said they trusted Trump to do what's right for the country.
I think it's something that needed to be done eventually, so I'm sort of glad that he's doing it now. I figure we've kicked the can down the road long enough and they don't need nuclear capabilities.
They think the risk of Iran getting a nuclear weapon is real, and they see Trump as a strong and decisive leader.
I love President Trump. I think he's doing a good job. I think he's doing the work that previous presidents were supposed to do it, never did it. I just would definitely never would like to see Iran with a nuclear weapon. It's tough, but somebody has to do the job.
I should say some of them also were not very engaged and intentionally were not following the news, but they do just trust him or at least give him the benefit of the doubt, even if they are hurting from high gas prices. And I did find some Democrat or independent-leaning people are hugely opposed to the war, given the cost. And let's just talk about that cost for a minute. The Pentagon has said a couple of weeks ago that it's been about $25 billion, the cost of the war so far, and that's a tally of all of the missiles, the Tomahawks and Patriots fired. and also the downed or exploded warplanes that we've seen. The Pentagon, again in March, asked Congress for up to another $200 billion in extra funding to pay for this conflict. That's a lot of money, especially when you consider just over a week ago, US federal debt surpassed 100% of GDP for the first time since World War II. And that level now is about US $32 trillion.
They're huge numbers, Jess, and given that financial cost, it's not surprising the administration is looking for an off-ramp. That's aside from everything else, from the optics and the approval ratings. Do you think that search for an off-ramp is happening? Is the war finally winding down? And if it is, has anything changed?
In my view, Trump does seem to be losing his appetite for continued heavy military strikes of Iran. About a week ago, he had meetings in the White House with all of his military advisors and top cabinet secretaries talking about options in Iran. And they put to him options for further escalation, and it didn't happen. And what we got instead was Project Freedom.
President Trump announcing a new operation. This is Project Freedom that will allow some of the ships that have been stuck in the Strait of Hormuz to be safely escorted out of that waterway.
Some of which have been stuck there for more than 2 months as this war has raged. Project Freedom barely lasted 36 hours.
This is a stunning reversal from the president. President Trump moments ago announcing that he is pausing Project Freedom.
We had some exchanges of firing between the US and Iran, and then some backlash from allies in the region, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, who really want to see a negotiated end to this war. Look, when Trump joined Israel in attacking Iran at the end of February, he did outline these 4 objectives. We want to destroy Iran's ability to launch missiles in the region. We want to annihilate their navy. We want to end Iranian support for terrorist proxy groups in the region. And we want to stop Iran from being able to acquire a nuclear weapon. And after 2.5 months fighting, yes, the US can point to some impressive statistics in terms of destruction of the Iranian navy. That has certainly occurred. They've also destroyed a lot, but not all of those missile launches. The recent US intelligence suggests that Iran has retained about half of its missile launches and also thousands of drones. So it's a bit of a tactical success, but a strategic failure. And one thing that we've definitely learned is the power of asymmetric warfare and how Iran doesn't need those naval ships to terrorize the region. It just needs a bunch of speedboats hidden in caves with some bad guys on the back with rocket-propelled launchers off their shoulders to keep causing chaos in the region. And the big thing that has not been achieved is the dismantling of the nuclear program. There's a bit of conjecture lately about what's going on in these talks and what's going to be agreed to, but possibly what we're going to get is something that looked very similar to what Obama had signed and what Trump ripped up when he came to office last time, and which he called one of the worst deals ever made.
Yeah.
One of the reasons Trump would be motivated to end the war sooner rather than later is he has this looming trip to China to see Chinese President Xi Jinping. Think that will be happening as this podcast goes to air. He would have loved for this to have been over before the Chinese visit. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. And what that means is he's going to arrive in Beijing, a much weakened position than where he would rather be.
And this meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping in Beijing is being closely watched around the world. It was meant to take place in late March, but was delayed because of the war. What is Trump hoping to get out of this visit?
What the White House would hope you to take away from this trip is that it's going to be a very commercially minded, business-minded kind of summit. They hope to come away with agreements for Chinese purchase of soybeans, of Boeing aeroplanes, possibly some beef deals. There's a lot of CEOs traveling with Trump to Beijing. The NVIDIA CEO, Visa, Boeing, Qualcomm, names like this. But behind the scenes, despite these big headlines, I think what this meeting is really about is just continuing a period of relative calm going on since they last met in South Korea towards the end of 2025. Both leaders need a period of stability without any shocks. Trump in particular has this America First agenda of revitalizing manufacturing onshore in the US. But as we've seen before, he doesn't have everything that he needs to be able to do that. And a really important single point of failure that the Chinese can manipulate is rare earths. So he just needs cool, calm relations with Beijing so he can kind of work on building up this America First narrative without any shocks to that. But I think one thing we have to keep in mind here is it's a very short summit, and I think the very big suck of all of the negotiating time is going to be Iran and then probably Xi pushing for discussions around Taiwan. And this is a really kind of key part of the negotiations there as well.
Jess, do you agree with the analysis that China has emerged as the quiet winner from this war?
Given that China buys 90% of Iran's oil, it definitely has been affected by the Iran war and the effective blockade on the Strait of Hormuz for the last 2 months. But it is also sitting on huge petroleum stockpiles at home and does generate a lot of its electricity from coal-fired power and renewable energy. So it has been able to ride out the energy crisis much better than other countries, especially in Asia, where they rely so heavily on oil that's shipped through the Strait of Hormuz. They have been able to sit back and watch their greatest strategic rival go in on a very heavy military campaign for 2.5 months and collect a lot of intelligence on those operations, the number of drones and missiles that have been launched, how American air defense systems have held up in the Middle East. So they've been able to collect a lot of material along the way. The thing is, though, China's economy is a little bit under pressure at the moment. Their consumer economy is weakened, and so they're really doubling down on an export-orientated economy. And so anything that hurts the global economy and raises the prices of inputs, whether that's fertilizer or helium, they are exposed to that. And so there is this hidden incentive for China to perhaps help in some way the US and see the end of this Iran war and perhaps put some pressure on Iran in the background to open the Strait of Hormuz. So yes, I do think it's right to say that China is a quiet winner from the Iran war, but they are looking for an out, and so is Trump. He really needs to turn his attention back to domestic issues. More than anything, he needs to see those gasoline prices coming down. It might be the one thing to turn his appalling poll numbers around, and he really needs that because the midterm elections are just around the corner.
We're talking about the Trump administration and its handling of the war against Iran. Jess, we're 6 months away from the US midterms. There's a shaky ceasefire in place and everyone is watching to see how the Iran war affects those races. You're currently in the middle of primary season over there. What's happening?
So this November we have the midterm election, and it happens at the halfway point of a presidential term. You have all seats of the House of Representatives up for grabs and 1/3 of the Senate. So these are the two houses of Congress, and Trump's Republican Party currently controls both of those. The November midterms really represent the first chance for voters to have their say on how the Trump administration has gone so far this term. And what's happening now in May and June in the US is that all of the contenders for the midterm congressional races are getting worked out through a series of primary elections. There is this really interesting thing going on from a Republican point of view of how much money and time and effort Trump himself and the loyal supporters around him are putting into going after people he feels have wronged him in the last months, years. In some cases, this is also related to this other issue we've got going on. It's absolute open warfare in America at the moment as the parties try and redraw these congressional maps to stitch up seats that are more likely to fall in their favour at the elections in November. It started when Trump pushed the Texans to redraw their map last year, which they did.
Texas can use its new congressional map for the upcoming midterm elections,
so that a number of seats were more likely to fall Republicans.
Breaking news out of California, the Supreme Court is allowing the state to use a new congressional map for this year's midterms.
The Democrats responded by redrawing maps in California and also Virginia. You've had some states where redrawn maps were proposed but knocked back by the state legislatures in those states. One big one was Indiana. The Republican-controlled legislature up there knocked back redrawing their map. This happened last year. It would have been a huge winner for the Republicans if this new proposed map had gone through, and Trump has taken it very personally. He has been absolutely furious ever since. There were 21 out of 40 Republican senators that knocked back this proposal, and 8 were up for re-election this year and faced primary contests, which just happened last week. So of those 8 that were going up in a primary race last week, because of money that Trump and his backers have put into opponents in those primary races, 5 of them were knocked back.
Oh.
And the thing is, the money getting thrown around already is extraordinary. Usually in these state primary races, you might find maximum hundreds or thousands being spent, but we're seeing millions and millions of dollars being spent on state races here.
And there's an opportunity cost, isn't there? Because that money's not being spent on races where they probably need to find really good candidates to take on the Democrats.
Absolutely. There are Republican-held seats that are at risk of falling to Democrats, and there are also seats that Democrats hold on slim margins that they could really be putting a lot of effort into. But there's 2 others I want to mention to you. There's a gentleman called Thomas Massie. He's a bit of a thorn in Trump's side. He was a Kentucky House member who helped get the vote up in the House to release the Epstein files. So you can imagine Trump has not been very happy with him.
I can imagine.
And another guy is Senator Bill Cassidy down in Louisiana, who has actually been a really strong supporter of Trump and all the things he has tried to do this term, including voting for his One Big Beautiful Bill. But still, the president is holding a grudge because Cassidy voted against him in impeachment proceedings in 2021. So these are the kinds of people that Trump is directing a lot of money into going against. And as you say, there's this opportunity cost of not focusing on seats where they could be winning. The past 5 presidential winners have lost the following midterm election, and in the past 100 years, the party of the sitting president has gained House seats only 3 times.
Wow.
I think given that history and given where Trump is in polling, I still think the Republicans will struggle to hold the House, but I think they'll find it easier to do that in the Senate.
And Jess, in looking at this race and what will influence how people vote, what about Trump's erratic behaviour and the debate over his mental health? It gets a lot of airplay in Australia, and there's lots of clips played on social media of rambling speeches. There's obviously his Truth Social posts that are quite erratic and at different times in the night. Are serious questions being asked about his mental capacity in the US?
Listen, I think his mental capacity is really fair game to be scrutinised. I think the country got quite a shock at how badly the story was missed of Joe Biden's mental decline. And so there is heavy scrutiny on Trump and his behaviour, and whether it's just Trump being Trump or if something deeper is going on here. Manner is absolutely shocking. It is not what you would expect from the president.
You take a look at her, she's a slob. Why is it the Gulf of Mexico? It should be the Gulf of America. I was going to call it the Gulf of Trump. I mean, I'd look her right in that fat, ugly face of hers.
He's picked a fight with the Pope.
Because Pope Leo said things that are wrong.
He's put out an image on Truth Social depicting himself as Jesus. He does these long, rambling speeches.
You hide behind a tree and the drone comes down and it circles you with fire. You don't have a chance. The tree comes down also, by the way. It's so intense. I mean, you see these trees being knocked down like they're being sawed down by a top-of-the-line timberman.
You can see him fall over his words sometimes and mix up little details. He does these galling attacks on journalists.
Let me just tell you, you are an obnoxious, a terrible reporter. Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person?
I watch him every single day. He's available to the press every day, and he does these long back and forth question and answers. And I think when people call him crazy, what they are describing are some other characteristics that are very true. He's instinctive, he's transactional, he's brash, he's emotional, he's easily frustrated, he's a very short-term thinker, he's impatient, and he absolutely acts in an unorthodox way. And when you put all of those things together, I can see how people might wonder about his mental decline. I do still see a sharpness to him, though, and his ability to remember facts and do these long, rambling campaign speeches. And I know they kind of wander around the garden path, And I think people like his unscripted manner. They like the fact that he's authentic, he's not afraid of being politically incorrect. And I did hear about this on the streets of Miami as well.
Politicians, they always tell you what you want to hear. Yeah. And then they turn around and do whatever they want to do.
This idea of not being woke, it really resonates here in the US.
That's the typical politician. Yeah. He is not a politician, in my opinion.
I think that the people who do kind of grab for the kind of crazy moniker are also people that have been hurt by his policies because he doesn't seem to have a lot of empathy for people. You know, he calls affordability a con job. He doesn't seem to care about how his war in Iran has caused this extraordinary global energy crisis. And he also acts with huge hubris, right? Naming things after him, the Arc de Trump. He's building this ballroom. He's putting his image on coins and passports. And, you know, he will be 80 in June, and I think a continued focus on his cognitive capacity is appropriate.
Jess, when we last spoke, you also ran through some of the people in his inner circle who were influential in setting policy and guiding his decisions. What about that inner circle now? How has that changed since the start of the year?
I think that Trump has got a taste for firing. Since the beginning of this year, Trump has fired 3 cabinet secretaries. Kristi Noem, out of Homeland Security, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, and Lori Chavez de Remo, who was the Secretary of Labor. Trump obviously lost patience with them and was very quick to send them out the door once he'd made that decision. There's also a lot of questions about Kash Patel, his FBI director. There was some quite scathing reporting over here about his drinking habits as he runs such an important agency. I think his inner circle are still the same people. You're not seeing a lot of Stephen Miller, his deputy chief of staff, because immigration has been pushed down the priority and the attention list at the moment. But he's still very, very influential inside the White House. But there are still some key people around him who are close to Trump and who he trusts. And I would say that top of that list remains the Vice President, J.D. Vance, his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Scott Bessent is kind of a quiet achiever, the Treasury Secretary. He'll be leading a lot of the China visit this week. These are the people closest to Trump in the White House. And interestingly, as we look at the Iran war, he still leans very, very heavily on 2 special employees, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff, a property developer turned Middle East envoy. They are heavily involved in the negotiations. It was interesting to see a few weeks ago he sent Vice President J.D. Vance to Islamabad in Pakistan to lead a round of talks. Even though they were marathon talks and it was quite historic to see the Vice President go over there, they obviously didn't end in a deal. And I think that that was quite bruising for Vance because he has a reputation and he, I think, has worked hard to gain this reputation as the person in Trump's cabinet most opposed to this war. So to have to then go to Pakistan and be the face of the administration in these talks is probably the last place he would have wanted to be.
And then fail at the talks.
Yeah, absolutely. And then for it to not end in something that you could call a success was tough. You've got to ask the question, does that hurt his chances going into 2028? Because he's still seen as the person in pole position to be the Republican nominee for president. I don't think it does. I think he's still a very strong contender for that position. And the other person is Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. Although he has seemed to be sidelined out of a lot of the jobs that you would think the Secretary of State would be doing. He didn't lead those negotiations in Pakistan. He will go to China this week, but he doesn't seem to have been at the forefront of all of the preparations. Last week, he did go to the Vatican to smooth things over with Pope Leo, and that seemed to be successful.
Our final question, Jess, if voters turn against Donald Trump in the midterms and the Republicans do lose control of the House, what does that mean for the final 2 years of his presidency?
Yeah, so as we were saying before, even though some of these congressional map redrawings seem to be giving the Republicans an edge, I do think the polls are in the Democrats' favour and they are likely to go on and win the House. I do not think the Democrats will end up winning the Senate. So you end up with this situation of Democrat control of the House and Republican control of the Senate. So without control of both houses of Congress, some people say that this will cause Donald Trump to be a lame duck president. I don't think that's the case. I think he's going to continue to turn to executive power. There's very little that he's done this term so far that's required congressional approval, apart from his big tax cut and spending bill, the one big beautiful bill. All of the other consequential moves that he has made, whether it's going to war with Iran, striking Venezuela, putting in tariffs or building a ballroom, he's doing them with his executive power. I think the real test for him going into the last half of this term will be as public attention turns to the race for president in 2028. He is not going to be the centre of attention. He is going to have to sit back and watch Democrats and Republicans vie to be the presidential nominee on each side. And given he's not that centre of attention, I think it's going to provoke some of his worst behaviour.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks for listening to The Fin. On the podcast today, United States correspondent Jessica Gardner. If you want to read more about the Iran war, Trump's presidency and his visit to China, click the links in the show notes. The Fin is produced by Mandy Coulin. Head of audio is Alex Gow, who also composed our theme, and Fiona Buffini is head of premium content. For more stories about markets, business and power, subscribe to the Financial Review at afr.com/subscribe. I'm Lisa Murray. See you next week.
The Australian Financial Review.